Welcome everyone to episode 184 of Just Joshing. I am your host, Joshua Penteler-Husco. I write stuff in podcasts too. My guest today is Calvin Jim. Calvin, much like myself, is an Aurora Award finalist in the upcoming Aurora Awards, in which you can vote for him and myself by paying $10 to the Canadian Association of Science Fiction and Fantasy. You can go to their website and you can put in $10 and you can get access to all the content that's being our finalists, and you can read it and vote right now. So for $10 you can go and decide who gets the cool Aurora pins at the end. I really enjoyed my conversation with Calvin simply because this was a really cool opportunity to really get in his head and understand what he writes for, which is why I do these interviews to begin with. And Calvin's a cool dude. I think you're going to find that out in this conversation. So let's just get right to it, shall we?
This is his busiest time of the year. Oh, I imagine it is. So the recorder is back on. We're going to redo this again. Right. I tried to ask Calvin about anything incriminating he's done. He pleaded the fifth. He didn't say a word, which means he's got to be something really nefarious. But he won't tell me or divulge it here, which is too bad. So sad. I incriminate myself all the time. So
I'll just let you know now. We don't actually have the fifth in Canada. That's an American thing.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. But I mean, you can still plead the fifth. It doesn't do you any good here. Nope. But you can still plead it.
Does you absolutely no good?
No, it doesn't. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a weird thing. I think the weirdest thing I noticed when I was growing up was the whole concept that innocence until proven guilt has become a lot harder to maintain. Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Well, no, you're like, okay, sure. No, it just seems like it's more because the thing about pleading the fifth in the States, right? The idea behind it isn't so you can't incriminate yourself, and the onus is on the law to prove you're guilty. That's the idea anyway. Now, in reality, it might be a different story, but that's the idea. If you don't have the fifth, the onus is on you to prove your innocence.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
It's been a while.
Yes, no worries. So how have you been?
I have been doing great especially ever since the Aurora nominations were announced.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Congratulations to you as well.
Yeah, that was a surprise for me, completely.
Well, it was a bit of a surprise for me. I did ask people if they could nominate, but I was not expecting to actually be on the ballot. So I am very, very humbled that I received this nomination.
So for the record, what are you nominated for specifically?
I am nominated for my short story, Rose's Arm, which is in the Laxa Media book, Where the Stars Rise, nice. Which is an Asian science fiction and fantasy collection. Again, by Laxa Media.
Yes, he does a lot of cool anthologies, actually.
He has some incredible anthologies, and there's more coming as well.
Nice. So I guess you're involved in a few of them?
No. just this one right now. There are others coming, and I'm hopeful. But the thing I really, really like about Laxa Media and their anthologies is that they give back to the community, and a portion of their proceeds go to worthy causes. And I really like that giving back to the community.
It's the right thing to do if you can. I mean, everybody wants to obviously make something out of it, but when you get right down to it, once everybody gets whatever they're going for, I mean, why not? So what was your charity for this?
I think it was, now don't quote me, I'll have to take a look at the book, but I think it was the Kids Helpline.
Nice. Yeah.
But you'll have to ask Laxa Media, because I think they change it up depending on the anthology itself.
Yeah. No.
Some of their other charities, they have. Kids Helpline is the one that I'm most familiar with, but I think depending on the anthology, they will do something related to the subject matter of that anthology.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Which totally makes sense. So, you've been writing for a long time?
I've been writing for just over 12 years now. And the only reason I know that is because I started writing seriously started to write after my son was born, and he is 12 years old.
Nice. So what spawned that? Like what was the decision to write? Is something you always wanted to do, or was it?
No, it actually wasn't something I always wanted to do, but I've always been a creative type, and I've always thought about doing it, but just never actually got around to it. I actually took a couple of creative writing courses in the 1990s, but nothing ever came of it, and I didn't have the discipline at the time, and I was going through other things. But when my eldest son came along, I was at home quite a bit, and I thought, okay, this is my chance. I can be here in front of a computer. I'm going to start writing. And I have not looked back since.
Yeah. So, just short stories? Have you done novels at this point, or what?
I have 2 unpublished novels, and I'm working on the 3rd and the 4th right now. I haven't really gotten them too far past the 1st and 2nd draft stages. Although the first novel that I wrote has gone to a 3rd draft now. Okay, and I'm not currently working on it. I'm trying to get the other novels that I am currently working on done.
So I'm going to ask that go from this perspective. Is it like, do you want to publish your first novel, or was it like a lesson kind of thing for you?
I will eventually publish it in some form. It's my goal to, because I feel very passionate about that novel. But I'm still, as far as I'm concerned, still in the learning phase, and I really want to get another novel under my belt before I can farm these ones out and see what happens. I've submitted it to other publishers. It's been it's gotten some good compliments back from them, but it hasn't sold yet.
No. So that was your first.
Yep.
And you've done 2 other ones since?
Well, no, I've done one other completed novel, and I'm working on a 3rd and a 4th right now. Both of those are still in the first draft stage.
So that's interesting because, I've talked about this with other authors, like the idea that you have a bunch of ideas kind of in the writing in your head at all times.
Yep.
Right? So do you like just bounce them all? Like, do you have is there like one where it goes, you have to write me now kind of deal, or is it more like, is there a discipline aspect to it with you?
For me, it's I get attracted to the shiny new thing.
New car
and
smell.
So that's why I've ended up writing a lot of short stories in the past bunch of years, because I got this new idea, I'm going to go for this. I love that idea, I'm going to go for that. But for novels, it's not a sprint like a short story can be. It's a slog, and it's a marathon run. And when I've written the novels, I've actually sat down and actually taken the time and gone through them straight.
That's very interesting, because for me in particular, I find short stories are harder than novels, right? And the reason I say that is just because for me, I have a big mouth and I talk, and I can almost like vomit words, whereas a short story, right, you have to be very, very concise to make a really good one, because you're conveying a lot of information in sometimes very tiny spaces, right? Which I find is a lot harder for me to do. Whereas with a novel, okay, I can set something up here and I can kind of just go through it, but kind of feel a little flow with it and get to it. Sometimes a short story is like, okay, I have this really cool idea, but I only got like, say, 2,000 words.
Yeah.
Right? So how do I get this into 2,000 words?
I feel the same way. I can actually throw out a huge number of words in a novel at any one time. The thing that I have trouble with short stories is getting the idea as concise as possible, because usually I've got this idea and this idea and this idea, and I'm going to combine them all into a story, but that doesn't make for a good short story a lot of the time, because you're trying to cram in way too much into the story. It's better to have something very, very simple and maybe just one idea.
Yeah, it sounds like it's about, for short stories, it's about the focus. Like, what's the story that really needs to be told here?
Yeah.
And what idea best conveys that?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
For novels, I've been able to sit down and explore and go through several chapters before having to look back and say, oh, okay, maybe this isn't working as well. But I have that freedom to go on and on and on.
So you don't go through it like when you do a draft, and it's not like you go through it all at once and then you go back and fix it. No, you go through it like to a certain point and then you go back, kind of deal.
Well, these days my process has morphed quite a bit. The process you just described was exactly what I did with the first novel that I wrote. Okay, I guess you might call that pantsing. But and that's exactly what I did. That's all I knew at the time. I wrote this novel about 10 years ago. I had some time, and I took that time and wrote the whole thing. Up to that point, I'd only written a couple of chapters, and basically I knew where to begin, and that was it. I had no idea where the goal was, and I was just exploring at the time. And that's how I finished the novel as well. But there got to a point where I wasn't going anywhere, and I was staring at the keyboard, and I couldn't figure out where to go. So what I started to do was, okay, from here, this is what has to happen. From here, this is what has to happen. And slowly but surely, I went from pantsing to plotting.
And I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I when I do it, I always have an ending. Like, I know what the end of the story is. I know what the beginning of the story is.
And it's just the fuzzy middle that has to get written.
Well, no. So it's not so fuzzy. So okay, so the first Cloud Diver novel definitely had a fuzzy middle, like really, really fuzzy middle, and it made it so when my editor went through it, it was soggy, like, you know, like as in Swiss cheese. I could put my fingers through that whole section. Next draft, I because I knew how things had to go in kind of structure, I tightened that up really, 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 really strongly. So now, the next book, because of the details required for the next book, I'm plotting it more. I'm still pantsing it a bit, but it's not so much. Okay, so I know what the villain is. I know what's going on. I know the story that kind of has to be told. I know what that's about. So I kind of know what's like this part. But I leave myself some holes, because I find real life sometimes makes things, adds some spice to it that you didn't plan on.
Yep.
Like I'm doing a noir story. So I did this. Legitimately, this was my last train. It was the last train ride from the south to the north, because I do these podcasts and I go wherever people are, right? And so it's a noir story. It's a completely nihilistic, and this was almost a nihilistic final train ride home. So this big giant dude, I'm not kidding, he was skipping all across the C train. Suddenly, so somewhere along the way, a bunch of teenagers came on. One literally pulls out drugs, and this guy skips over to this guy. And I'm looking around, and I am the only person on this train that's legal, like even remotely legal.
Okay.
I'm like, this is the last train, so I can't get off and get another train. So I'm like, okay, the moment I get downtown, I'm getting off. And when I left, they were holding. I didn't want to know where that was gonna go. I just was like, I'm out, I'm done. But in a noir story, that's a really cool ambiance. So like, it's one of those things I couldn't write that to save my life. I wouldn't have come up with that in a million years.
Well, I'm glad you've got it. So I hope to see it in the story someday.
Yeah, you're like trauma.
So
Life strange.
Yes, it is. I found that writing short stories can sometimes be a lot harder, but I get a lot more ideas from them. And usually I start writing them, and I discover things aren't working. But at least it's not a novel where I've committed like 50,000 words, and then when I figure out that it's not working. But a short story, at least, okay, a couple of thousand words into it, it's not working. Okay, I can put that aside and go on to something else and not feel as bad.
No, or I imagine the fixes are smaller. It's almost like making like a finer, like instead of making a big giant clock, you're making a watch. Right,
Yeah.
something, right? So the pieces are smaller, still kind of the same principle, but the pieces are a little smaller, a little finer. So if it's not working, why isn't it working? It's like little piece,
Yeah.
click.
Yeah, for my story, Rose's Arm. That's actually actually almost the story behind it. Is that I had submitted it already a couple of times. I wrote it once to a deadline, submitted it, and when I finished it, I knew it wasn't working. But I needed to finish it anyway. It was 5,000 words, and I submitted it. And it rightly got rejected for the exact reason I thought it would get rejected. So I went back, put a lot of thought into it, decided that I had the antagonist incorrect, and then fixed it up. And by that time, it was the story that it was that you see in the anthology. I sent it out, and of course it got accepted because it was a lot stronger of a story. When I know something's not working, I usually know why it's not working, but I need to get it down on paper and send it out or give it to somebody to take a look at, and they will usually confirm, yeah, this isn't working so well. But I'm glad it got accepted by somebody, and I was really, really happy with it. The beginning was fine. It was the ending that really needed work.
So you have a good feel, kind of like intellectually, why a story works or doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So does that make the fixes easier for you?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So if the fix is just fixing up some grammar, some words, yeah, it's pretty simple. But the fixes I'm talking about, even for something like Rose's Arm, were very, very deep. I had to go back and rejig my entire concept of the story. And the basics and where I got inspired by the story was there at the beginning, and it never changed. But the ending, how I resolved all the issues, needed to change. So I had to sit down and basically brainstorm. Okay, this works. This works. This works. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. What do I need to change? And that's where that's what I did. And I eventually came up with what you're reading in the anthology.
That's really good. So that's your most recent story. How many stories have you had?
Well, I think, believe it or not, I think it's only around 10. Okay, I started rather early, but I've only had the time to put out one short story a year over the past little while. I've had a bunch published in smaller presses. One in Australia, believe it or not, took one of my stories, and I've had a couple in Enigma Front, and I've got one coming out in Enigma Front, Onward, which is the new IFWA anthology coming out in launching at When Words Collide. So that's exciting. It's the title of that story is called Inugami, and it's the first story in the anthology. I'm very, very proud and happy that it got the first story. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So Australia is a really cool market, very cool science fiction market. Even though like that's kind of one of those like my bucket list places. Like if I want to do something in Australia, it's just because it seems like a cool.
Yeah.
A lot of cool authors are from there. So.
Yep. No, it was called the Tomorrow Anthology. I think you can still get it on Amazon, but I don't know if the press is still around.
Well, we live in such an interesting time in that like a press today may not exist tomorrow, because what's happening now is we're living in this really interesting point where things are there's almost like a genesis of stuff all the time, but then because of the nature of how the industry works today, some of it just disperses immediately, and then some of it sticks around and finds its niche somewhere. So. Where do you think it's all going?
I actually don't know where it's all going. I wish I could predict something like that. I mean, what it looks like it's going is that authors are more and more becoming independent contractors. They are basically fending for themselves, and self-publishing is now becoming, or it has already become, such a huge part of the entire market. But I'm a very bad predictor of what the future holds. Okay, I write science fiction and I write in the future, but I wouldn't use my writing to say, hey, this is where the world is going, because as much as I would like to try and follow those trends, I'm not the best person for that.
So let's ask a big question.
Yeah.
What are you trying to say in your writing?
I'm not actually trying to say any one thing, but I'll tell you what common thread is in all of my writing. I write Asian science fiction and fantasy. Now, what that means is I write science fiction and fantasy with Asian characters, Asian settings, or Asian themes, or all three at once. I've written a samurai story. I've written stories set in Japan in both the future and the past. My second novel is a Chinese wuxia novel.
Nice.
Chinese martial arts novel, because I have interests all over there, because I'm half Chinese and half Japanese, so I have my feet in both of those worlds. I can't really choose which one, so I go back and forth.
Both worlds have such rich histories.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on where you Han Dynasty in China is an awesome point in history. The samurai is just historically have always been a really cool mythological kind of thing. Even with modern I guess North American culture, it's a big thing. But I mean they're both very. If you look at the cultures, they're both very romantic. They both have a very again, just rich and deep. I mean, they're some of the oldest cultures on the planet.
Yep, they certainly are. One of the reasons why I started writing this Asian science fiction and fantasy was because at the time that I started, I didn't see very much of it on the bookshelves. There was some, but we were talking about 2005, and there wasn't much on the bookshelves. I had been seeking out just about everything I could, and most of it was not written by Asian writers. It was written by North American writers who did a fantastic job, but I wanted to see an Asian writer writing there. I mean, from Japan we had Haruki Murakami, who was not really a science fiction and fantasy author, but he is probably the most recognizable author from Japan, who writes in both Japanese and then gets translated into English. But now, since 2005, we have seen an explosion of science fiction and fantasy coming from China and Japan.
Absolutely.
There's aside from a couple of presses down in the United States that are taking an awful lot of Japanese literature and publishing their science fiction and fantasy. And of course, you have all the manga out there as well, which is like a huge segment of the Japanese literary market. But we are starting to see more Japanese thrillers and mystery novels. We've seen some Japanese horror. You may have heard of The Ring or Ju-on or other those movies. They were books.
Yes.
First, before they were ever movies, even in Japan.
I'm currently reading another, which is from over there. It's a really cool little horror story. I think it started off as a manga, but they translated into. I got the novel first. It's really good. I'm a huge from the manga side. I'm a huge Fullmetal Alchemist fan. I love that series and concept. It's phenomenal. And I can't remember. I always say Neosisan, I think is his name. I can't remember. I don't know if I'm saying it right. But he has like a whole bunch of these light novels that are really, 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 really good. And it's really interesting to read stuff from over there because the ideologies are, sensibilities are a little different. And I dig that because I like thinking differently. It's almost, again, not quite the same thing, but like learning another language. When you learn another language, right, you get this idea, you get a different sensibility, a different idea, a different imagery of how to communicate and convey things. And so when I'm reading stuff from another country, even though it's translated in English, so it doesn't quite have the full translation, you still get a bit of a sense of like it's a different place, it's a different idea, it's a different concept, and that's good because it expands what you see, what you perceive, what you.
One of the things about anime and manga, especially, a lot of people when they read it, most people in North America will probably only read it at a surface level. It's a great story with great characters and very interesting situations, but it's. There's an awful lot of the Japanese culture imbued in an awful lot of these, I guess, literary works. The mythology, the ways of thinking. There's a lot of Shintoism and Buddhism put into some of these anime and manga that disappears under the surface unless you have a deeper knowledge of the culture, and that's always very interesting to find out because I certainly don't know it all, and it's always interesting to find out later on.
Well,
you've been reading this. Did you know that this is an aspect of Shintoism that has come through in this part of the story? It's really, really fascinating.
Well, so this is a video game reference. I'm a big Persona fan.
Mm-hmm.
Huge Shinto references every single game I have played. There's a ton of Shinto references in there, and it's interesting because I love the Izanumi,
mm-hmm.
That's a big, like Persona 4. That's the big spoilers. That's a big that's a big part of the interaction of the game, and also. I mean, if you look at some of the earlier games, they'll have like a teacher that actually explains the mythologies. Like, if you really want to take the time to do it, there's a teacher that will go in and explain the mythologies and some of the concepts in the game. Now, obviously, you can't level up, so it's better on but again, it's there, and it's such a different. It's different. It's different in the sense, again, it's a different ideology. But it's also interesting too because there are common themes in every mythology, every culture, So it's just like, and that's equally as interesting too.
Now, aside from Japanese culture, since I'm also half Chinese, I've also tried to look into Chinese science fiction as well, and there is an explosion right now of that coming up, but there isn't as much out there.
No.
Even though Chinese science fiction is relatively new, even for the Chinese. It's been around for at least 100 years, but it's only now starting to trickle out. I think the most famous Chinese novel right now is Three Body Problem. It has been translated by Ken Liu, who is a Nebula and Hugo award winner, is starting to write his own novels. But he's been writing short stories for years before finally being recognized for his work and starting to write his own, translating other Chinese novels as well. But Three Body Problem is a very, very bizarre book, and my understanding of the philosophies in there is minimal. I read that and I'm in awe of the kind of stuff that they're actually coming out with from China.
It's going to be interesting in the next 10 years because China is becoming the economic power. So it's going to make sense that as they assert themselves more and more and more, we're going to see a lot more of their media and how they think and how they do things coming out in a variety of different mediums, including books. I'm curious. I can't wait to actually see what comes out from that.
So it's my interest in Chinese literature goes back to wuxia, or Chinese martial arts fiction, which has been made popular over the past while by mostly Chinese movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero, and those things which have hit North American shores. But that form of literature goes back. Well, there was wuxia, which came out started around the 17th, 1800s, but there's proto wuxia, which goes all the way back 2,000 years.
Which is really cool. So I guess I should ask this: are you a Bruce Lee fan? Because he brought a lot of different, especially our fighting sensibilities today come from him.
Yeah, I know. Jeet Kune Do and Wing Chun, all of those words came because Bruce Lee came in the 1950s and 60s from Hong Kong. I'm a Bruce Lee fan, but I wasn't when I was a kid. Okay, I remember my cousins really liking Bruce Lee and watching his movies when the few movies that he did when they came out. But I wasn't a huge fan back then. But I've come to appreciate the trail that he blazed into North America in both the martial arts realm and also bringing China to North America.
Yeah, because he was pretty much the first one, or one of the first ones to do that. So.
Yeah, he definitely was.
Yeah.
But for literature-wise, it'll be very exciting to see what comes over from China. There's also Chinese writers in Canada that are writing novels, and some in the United States who are also writing novels. Because they're from China, they come over with all the cultural knowledge, and they're able to take that knowledge and create some very interesting novels. I think the most recent one that I've seen was Poppy War. Okay, the name of the author escapes me right now, but this is. I initially thought, this is probably talking about the wars that they had with Britain in the 1800s, but it wasn't. Okay, I was actually quite surprised to read that it had nothing to do with that and about colonialism. But so there are some very strong writers coming from China or immigrating from China. The unfortunate part for myself is that, I may be half Chinese and half Japanese, but I'm all Canadian. Okay, which means that I was born in Canada, and I have a Chinese father and a Japanese mother who tried to teach me about their ancestral cultures. Because I'm third generation, I don't have the language anymore. They don't. My father never really had the Chinese language. My mother speaks Japanese fluently, but she doesn't write it. So she is just as much of a stranger to the Japanese culture as I am in some respects. But she has the language. She's got 5 steps up from me.
It's like my grandmother with Maltese. I'm third generation from that. Now, when I listen to my grandmother, I can tell what she's saying. I have an idea of what she's saying, but the language in terms of like how to speak it, and that it's not me. I'm also in a place though where, I mean, this is the reality too. I'm in a place where I'm don't get to use it, right? So that's what makes it really hard. But I was in in an environment like we're in a different environment, and if we were in an environment where we had the necessity to practice it, but also the opportunity. Because that's the other thing too. Like I know with me, with the way my life is right this moment, I don't have I don't have it, right? Because it's just I can't use it. It's not applicable right this minute. So I've lost something there. The trade-off is I'm living here and now, and I know when I have my own kids, right, they're if they're here, they're gonna pick that up. Now if I have my grandkids, who knows, right? And I think we all, after we get to the third or the fourth generation, like that just seems to happen, is that knowledge that was there is lost, or what replaces it is what's maybe needed in this place in this time. I could be wrong on that, and I mean there's a bit of a loss, but there's also a bit of a gain too.
Yeah.
Right?
You become a person who feels like they're sort of stuck in between. Okay. They have their ancestral culture on one side, and then they have the Canadian culture on the other, which is one of the other big reasons why I wanted to explore my culture in my writing. Why I use characters and settings and themes from that are Asian more than anything else. I mean, I try to bring those sensibilities in, but I know that I am not 100% involved in the Chinese or Japanese worlds. I am like an awful lot of other authors who came before me, who blazed that trail. I have an awful lot of research to do in order to I guess simulate that culture better than I'm able to by just scribbling it down on a piece of paper. And I think I've got a responsibility for that, and I don't want to misrepresent my own ancestral cultures. I've always felt that I've had one foot in each world, because Canadian culture is not. It's definitely not Asia.
Yeah.
And it has very, very different Western sensibilities, as you've said before, and as a result, my ancestry is very different. The family that I have out in Japan, I've only briefly met. Okay, have very different ways of looking at things than we do here in Canada. And when I've traveled back there, despite the fact that I could blend in, I still don't feel like 100% comfortable when I go back. I mean, I can't. I don't speak the language as well as even my mom.
So the only thing I can kind of relate to this, I moved around an incredible amount as a kid, to the point that I don't really have roots in the traditional sense at all. So the disadvantage I have is no matter where I go or where I live, I'll never fully fit in, because I've seen too much of everything else to do this. On the flip side though, right, because I've seen what I've seen, and I'm a part of what I'm part, I'm both outside and inside. And they're like, again, you have a different knowledge base, a different understanding of things than anybody else, and that's a unique gift. Does that make sense?
It is.
Yeah.
As I said, when I started writing, and I said, okay, I'm going to go all gung-ho and write Asian science fiction and fantasy. I didn't mention this earlier, but in a lot of ways, that was a very naive way of looking at things. I didn't realize the depth of responsibility that comes with actually saying something like that. Okay, I'm going to go out and do that. And then when I started actually writing the stories, I was writing very superficial kinds of stories that only touched upon Asian themes. And when I started to dig even further and dig into my own ancestral culture, I realized how much I didn't know and how much that was never given to me. But I also realized how much more that my parents gave to me that Canadian culture will never give to me. Okay, and the easiest thing I can think of is take food for instance. Okay, sushi is something that I've been consuming since I was a kid, but it really didn't come out here in Canada in a big way until the 1980s, early 1990s. And now it's everywhere. Now for Japanese food these days, the big thing is ramen. Okay, in Calgary, there's been an explosion of ramen restaurants, and I haven't been to all of them yet, but I'm getting close. Because there's at least 10 that I can probably point out on a map. And I've got my favorites, but there's a whole bunch of them now, and some of it tastes very much like the stuff you get in Japan, but it's a little slightly off. And I wasn't the one who made that comment. The chefs did, because they can't get the ingredients.
Yeah. There's an ingredient that's just off, and no matter what you do to compensate, you just can't quite do it.
Yeah. But knowledge about the food in a particular culture will tell you how much you know about that culture in the first place.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's only one aspect of getting to know culture, but the way that people think in Asia is very, very different than the way they think here. And you may not think that way, but once you start talking to them and you get to know them, then you realize, okay, there are some things that we don't think about here.
Yeah.
But it's just a different way of looking at life, and a different philosophy. And it's as I continue to write, I read an awful lot about this, about these philosophies and these ways of looking at things, the history and the culture, and I'm learning just as much as when I'm writing than I've ever learned as a kid. And I've taken the time that I've been writing, and I've used it to reconnect with my ancestral cultures. And I've come to the point where, okay, whatever I write, I know it's not going to be an exact mirror of Asian culture. I can't get there. But what I've got is, as you say, I've got a foot in both worlds. I am an insider and an outsider all at the same time. And I'm not the only one to feel this way. There are so many other people, immigrants from just about everywhere, who feel exactly the same way.
Absolutely. Mr. Calvin.
Yes.
I think we have an interview.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, so this will be out around August.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk about what's coming next for you and how people can get a hold of you?
Okay, well, coming up next, I've mentioned this already, but I'll mention it again. Enigma Front Onward is coming out and launching at When Words Collide this August, and my story Inugami is in that anthology. And I've seen the list of stories in there. It is a fantastic list. I haven't read all the stories yet. I haven't had that opportunity yet, but the list looks fantastic, and I can't wait to get my hands on the book.
Awesome.
Okay. As for getting a hold of me, I'm not as prevalent on social media as I would like to be. I can be found on Facebook. So you can reach me there, and I'll reach out to anybody who reaches out to me. Right now, I am putting together an author page, so people will be able to reach me at that one. But I don't have that out yet.
Okay.
By WWC, I hope to have it out.
Do you have an address for it already?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. So it's still in the planning stages.
Fair enough.
Okay. Congratulations again on your Aurora Award.
Thank you.
It is absolutely fantastic to be recognized by your peers.
Absolutely. No, it totally is. I was a complete shock. And good luck to you, and I hope you get your award as well.
Absolutely.
So that was my conversation with Calvin Jim. Thanks, Calvin, for being a part of my show. You are welcome back anytime. I look forward to when you do more novels yourself. It was really a pleasure to get into your head. It was really cool. Thank you very much for being on my show. And like I said, everybody, Calvin's a finalist. Go vote for him. He deserves it. And that's almost it. I kind of been avoiding talk about When Worlds Collide, not because it was a bad show. It was far from it. It was the opposite. It was a fantastic show for me. I've been working at this podcast now for 3 years. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people, and it's kind of coming back on me. I had a little bit of a imposter syndrome thing happen when I was at the When Worlds Collide, because I've never had that many people come up to me and go, how much I like my show. And it kind of put things into perspective on a couple things. I have been incredibly consistent on with this podcast. 184 episodes, at least one episode a week, every week for 3 years. That says an awful lot about my commitment to this, and it's nice to see it being rewarded. My writing, I don't advertise my writing like I should, and I'm not as consistent with my writing as I am with my podcast. This year, that's in part because the success the podcast has had this year, but it's something that made me think, what if I was as consistent with my writing as I was with this podcast? Where could I be in 3 years? And that was the biggest lessons I learned from When Worlds Collide. Well, that, and never ever underestimate the power of Dr. Seuss. I'll never do that again either. I came up with this idea of Dr. Seuss off, and I thought, I wasn't sure what to expect from this. It seemed incredibly silly, and it certainly was, I'm not going to lie. But it was also honestly the greatest thing I've ever done at any convention I've ever been to. I have never seen a crowd have that much fun ever at a convention, and I'm going to make that my mission. Every year I'm at When Worlds Collide, or every convention I do, I try to do something this fun that people can enjoy, because that really, really is what this is all about. If people have a tendency to take everything seriously, and there are definitely times when it's important. You got to be serious, you got to be professional, and you got to do whatever it is your thing is. But it doesn't have to be all the time. In fact, I would go so far as to say, if it's a little fun, you draw people in a lot more than if you're serious all the time. And that has been something how have I approached how I market myself. So, but anyway, that will do it for another episode of Just Joshing. So if you like the podcast, a couple things you can do. You can subscribe to it at Podomatic or iTunes or whatever player you're listening on. That'd be great. You want to leave a comment about how much you like the show? That's even more fantastic. If you don't like the show, just don't tell anybody, okay? Okay. I have a YouTube channel, Joshua Pantelleresco, where there are currently 98 episodes archived. That will go up soon. And I keep saying that. I keep meaning to. It will be a more regular thing soon enough. My books, The Watcher, Storm Dancer, and Wandering God, are available at Mirror World Publishing. You can check out the website, mirrorworldpublishing.com. You can also check it out at Amazon, Kobo, wherever my books are sold electronically or brick and mortar. You can get my books. Please do so. Same thing. If you don't like them, don't tell anybody. But if you like them, please leave comments and reviews on Amazon, Goodreads, or anywhere along the like. Beyond all that, stay inspired. Thank you very much for listening. I will hopefully see you, or you'll listen to me again soon.
Josh.